Satish is there.
Yeah, ma'am, we can start, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, a pleasant good evening to one and all. So, we'll start with the physician prayer. So, dear Lord, thou great physician, I kneel before thee. Since every good and perfect gift must come from thee, I pray, give skill to my hands and clear vision to my mind, kindness and sympathy to my heart. Give singleness of purpose, strength to lift at least a part of the burden of my suffering fellow man, and a true realization of the privilege that is mine. Take from my heart all guilt and worthiness, that with the simple faith of your child, I'll rely on thee. So welcome, Alris. So on behalf of office bearers and chairperson of APA Vellore branch, I feel very privileged and extremely fortunate to welcome you all to this 38th virtual CME. So I take this golden opportunity to welcome our distinguished guest speaker and consultant endocrinologist, Professor Dr. Sheshadri sir, to enlighten us about the role of information technology during this pandemic. So welcome you, sir. So now I hand it over to Dr. Manikandan sir for secretary report and introduction of speaker.
Good evening to everyone. On behalf of APA Vellore District Chairperson Dr. K.E. Sampath sir and office bearers, I extend a warm welcome to our speaker Dr. M.S. Sheshadri sir and to all physicians and other doctors who have joined. APA Vellore District has been conducting CME periodically to enrich the physicians with the knowledge. It also has a portal to refresh and update physicians about the various topics in general medicine. We had conducted the last API meeting in GRT on 6/3/2021. It was a physical meeting after a long gap and was attended by around 60 doctors. We planned for a rheumatology CME with Dr. Debashish Danda sir, professor from CMC, a well-known international national speaker in rheumatology, in association with Narvi Hospital, Vellore, in the month of April. But due to the COVID second wave, it was cancelled in the last minute. Now, after a break of 3 months, we are gathered through the Zoom platform for 38th CME of APA Vellore District. APA Vellore WhatsApp group has been active for a long time, and all the physicians shared their experiences about COVID-19. I thank all the physicians for contributing their ideas and experiences. I request us to continue the same and to extend it to other topics also. I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Thambu David sir, HOD of Department of Medicine of CMC and their team for sharing their lectures in our WhatsApp group, and it is highly beneficial for many of the clinicians. I take this opportunity and owe a big salute to the doctors and healthcare workers, both from Government Vellore Medical College and Christian Medical College Vellore, and all other institutions in Vellore district for managing the second wave of COVID-19 pandemic successfully. I also request all doctors not to let their guards down and to continue the safety precautions like masks and social distancing, and also to encourage the patients to get vaccinated. So next is the introduction to the speaker. Today the chief guest is, I think everyone knows about sir, and I take the privilege to introduce my mentor here in this forum, Dr. Professor Sheshadri sir, the former head and Department of Endocrinology from Christian Medical College, Vellore Hospital, and consultant physician and endocrinologist, and honorary medical director of Tirumala Mission Hospital, Ronipet. Next slide. Sir has completed MBBS from Coimbatore Medical College, and sir was the best outgoing student of college and as well as university. Sir has received a number of university medals and almost in all the subjects in MBBS. Sir has received a gold medal, and sir has joined MD General Medicine KMC Vellore and did PhD Endocrinology at Royal North Shore Hospital, Sydney. He has spent around 34 years of dedicated service to Christian Medical College, Vellore, and has held various positions in Christian Medical College, starting from assistant professor to associate and professor and head of the Department of Endocrinology. Next slide. Sir is a member of many national research funding agencies. Sir is also a member of many professional bodies like Association of Physicians of India, Endocrine Society of India, and RSDA. Sir is a reviewer of number of journals like API, National Medical Journal of India. Sir has more than 100 publications in index medical journals, and he has been examiner for a number of MD and DM examinations. Sir is a brilliant clinician, prolific researcher, and an exceptional teacher. He has been a mentor and inspiration to several generations of students and doctors. And I am very fortunate that even I am one among those doctors who has got inspired by Sir. Actually, I'll share you an interesting thing. When I first met Sir in the Tirumala Mission Hospital, Sir was having a knee hammer, and while speaking, like he was having a knee hammer and a tuning fork. I thought, what an endocrinologist is going to do with a knee hammer and this thing. And then when I met and spent time with Sir, I understood that Sir is not an endocrinologist. He practiced still as a physician. Like like he's a super specialist who practiced as a physician. That's why I think he's a distinct among all the people. That's what I felt. So over to Sir for his presentation.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen now.
Yes, sir.
Allow me to share the screen.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Can I request everybody to turn off, mute themselves? I will answer questions at the end of the session.
Yes.
The topic I'm going to discuss today is health information technology during the COVID pandemic. I hope I am clearly
Yes, sir.
audible.
Yes, sir. Audible, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I'm audible.
Yes, sir. Audible, sir.
At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Anita
Yes, sir.
and the senior members of API, Dr. Sukumar, Dr. Satish, Dr. Manikandan, for inviting me to this meeting. In fact, I invited myself to this meeting. I told Mani we should resurrect the API meeting. It's not been happening for 3 months. And I have something important to share with API members. Not moving to the next slide. Okay.
Can you try, Sir?
Yeah. No, they're not moving to the next slide. Okay.
Keep moving, sir.
Okay.
Move.
Yeah, the COVID-19 pandemic was an unusual pneumonia first reported from the Wuhan province of China, rapidly spread to all the countries of the world. In a way, it caused paralysis of the entire world. Transport, both domestic and international, were paralyzed. Patients were not able to access medical care as they used to. Access to medications became very difficult. Children's education suffered. Academic meetings suffered. Employment of people came down. Social interactions were reduced to a minimum. The finance and goods and services sector were nearly paralyzed. Now, did somebody talk about information technology many decades earlier? Yes, there was a person who used to write novels, a person called Alvin Toffler. His writings are prophetic. First, he wrote about the agricultural revolution. Later, he wrote about the industrial revolution and its impact on mankind. And the last book he wrote about in this series was the third wave, which was about information revolution. It was written in 1980, about 50 years ago. He said information technology is going to turn the world upside down. And we experienced it during the COVID pandemic. When the world almost came to a standstill, information technology showed its full potential. Let us start with a very dramatic example. We did not know how the pandemic started. Did it start from the bat, spread to pangolin, and then to man? Was there a malicious release of virus by a country? Was there an accidental release of virus from an experimental laboratory? These were the theories that were floating around. Many scientists struggled and could not find a clear-cut answer. A private individual who calls himself the Seeker, his identity is still not known. He used the internet, he tweeted his ideas, and many, including scientists, found it very stimulating and they joined in. And the final result was recently published by a person, a science reporter called Wade. And the result is that this was probably an accidental release of the virus from labs in China, Wuhan province, which had inadequate biosafety levels. Imagine a private individual was able to accomplish what many scientists could not do, and he did that with the use of internet. That is the power of information technology. I'm going to talk to you about how we use information technology during the troubled times of the pandemic. There are three pillars of medical services: patient care, education, and research. We effectively use information technology in all three spheres in Tirumala Mission Hospital. First, let me talk about online patient care. This is what I've been doing for the last nearly 15 months. My patients register for an appointment online with Tirumala Mission Hospital. The electronic medical record of the patient and his lab reports are emailed to me. A Google Meet is arranged. I am there, the patient is there, and there is a clinical assistant in the hospital. I interact with my patients. Problems are defined. A plan of treatment is formulated. The notes are recorded by the clinical assistant, and the tests are done by home collection of samples by our technicians. I review the patient with the results online. A medical report and a prescription are sent by email or WhatsApp. Medicines are home delivered if needed, and a follow-up appointment is fixed. All this is possible only because of this specialty that we call IT, or information technology. The advantages of this we discussed right at the beginning of the pandemic. Patients don't need to visit the hospital. They need to come only for an emergency. They can be seen in the convenience of their homes. There's less time and effort wasted. There's avoidance of crowding in the hospital, the pharmacy, laboratory. Doctors and patients minimize their exposure to the virus in the pandemic situation, and therefore limit spread of epidemic. We also devised a home package for COVID patients. Initially, we were involved with information, education, and communication of all the patients under our care and the community under our care. We devised the home isolation protocol, which is widely circulated. I'm sure many of the APA members would have seen this. We actually provide a kit consisting of a thermometer, pulse oximeter, and a glucometer if there is a diabetic who is afflicted with COVID. They're delivered at home. The nurse calls the family twice a day or more often as required. The patient monitors oxygen at home with the oximeter. If the saturation falls, a home oxygen concentrator can be used if the patient so desires. A hospital admission is actually necessary only if the patient gets sicker and the saturation dips. Many families under our care used this and found it very convenient, and we were able to avoid needless admissions. Now, this is a very key element of care of the community: information, education, and communication. As you all know, COVID, caused by the novel coronavirus, there is no effective cure till date. Prevention is the mainstay. We have to educate nurses, multipurpose health workers, family care volunteers in COVID appropriate behavior so that they can teach everybody in the community. There is a social vaccine concept which we floated, which consists of providing authentic and authoritative information, educating families about how to prevent infection, and use effective communication strategy. We sent SMS, short video clips, which many of you would have seen, mask use, hand washing. We arrange for Zoom meetings and Google meetings when called for. The message is, if everyone vaccine actually prevents epidemic spread, everyone's cooperation is needed. Everyone needs to understand. That's why the process of information, education, and communication are so vital. And this was all done on the internet platform. The importance of social vaccine, even now, cannot be ignored. Even after the biological vaccine is available, social vaccine is a very key element in preventing epidemic spread. Why? We all know a biological vaccine, there are certain difficulties with availability. A number of people are hesitant to use the biological vaccine. They are scared of side effects. And biological vaccines, none of them is 100% protective. If you combine social and biological vaccines together, we can provide almost 100% protection for an individual. Now, you all know about Tirumala Mission Hospital and Charity Trust. We serve 35,000 families in about 350 villages, about 160,000 population. And we looked at the outcome of our educational efforts in this community. Mask use increased from a baseline of 23% to 75%. We consider this as a very important achievement. And the concept of reverse quarantine or cocooning the elderly was very effectively practiced in our villages. Infection rate and mortality in our villages under our care are much lower than the national average, particularly in the elderly and vulnerable, in whom mortality and serious disease have a high prevalence. You all know about Ranipet town. It's an industrial town. There are many industries employing thousands of workers. Families of these workers stay in and around Ranipet. So we conducted education sessions for employees and families regarding COVID prevention, home isolation, and removed their fears about vaccination so as to reduce vaccine hesitancy. Apart from patients and communities, who else needs information and education? COVID is a novel disease. Humanity was hitherto not exposed to this particular virus. The voluminous scientific information which appears every day, the public, medical profession, and those in power, the polity, must be educated. Only then, as a nation, we can overcome this challenge. We have to educate all stakeholders in each village, panchayat members, village administrative officers, opinion leaders, industry representatives, politicians, district administrators, women's groups, teachers, philanthropists, local Rotary Club, Lions Club, and the concept of social vaccine can only be implemented with the support of every one of these people. We use the print media very widely. You are all aware that I've been writing along with Professor Jacob John. We wrote scientific articles that lay people can understand. We will propose ideas, we will discuss them over the phone, we'll prepare a first draft, and the draft will be revised many times so as to make it simpler and easy for a lay person to understand. They're published in widely read newspapers, and the topics that were discussed have received wide attention. They have brought about changes in the approach to epidemic management in the state and in the country. The topics that we covered from the beginning to now related to an approach to diagnosis, clinical diagnostic criteria, utility and disadvantages of diagnostic tests, preconceptional advice, study of epidemic dynamics, community transmission, whom to include in vaccine trials, who should receive priority when it comes to vaccination, what should be the dose interval between vaccine, vaccination of children and pregnant mothers, how to address vaccine hesitancy, evidence-based use of lockdown, district-wise study of the epidemic, and district-wise solutions. So we have been quite busy writing about all this and have been successful in a limited way in drawing attention to our concepts and ideas so that as a nation, we can confront this epidemic. The idea behind our writing was to provide authentic information, used to float concepts and ideas, and we also raised thought-provoking questions. The idea was to stimulate thinking at all levels, stimulate thinking in the public, the medical professionals, health administrators, policy makers, and research workers. And the aim was to find innovative solutions to the problems that we face day to day through a collective approach which involves the attention and hard work of all these people. Now remember what Dr. Jacob John and I used were IT tools to accomplish this. Just a mobile phone and a laptop. Now you may wonder how we approach research on the epidemic. Research itself is a product of an inquisitive mind. In an inquisitive mind, questions arise. And the research question is the fundamental basis of research. Research is basically an attitude which questions conventional wisdom. Let us say somebody says you give the vaccine at 4-week intervals, and somebody else says it needs to be given at 3-month intervals. Let us say somebody says 2 doses of the vaccine is enough. Is it truly enough? Is a third dose necessary? Now, these are the questions that we have raised in the public platform. Let us look at an example of how we used information technology during the pandemic to promote research. The question I had on my mind was whether the epidemic can be studied in terms of principles of physics. Let us look at Newton's laws. We would have all studied it in our +2, right? The first law is every body continues in its state of rest or of uniform motion unless it is impelled by an external force to change that state. Can it be applied to the epidemic? Before the pandemic, every country was going along its set routine until it was impelled by the epidemic to change that state. In physics, you would have learned mass multiplied by velocity equals momentum. In an epidemic, the number of active cases represents the mass. Large number of people who are currently infected, that is the mass. The doubling time of the new cases represents the velocity. And the product of the active cases and the doubling time is the daily number of new cases. That equals momentum. You have all experienced in driving a car. When you drive a car, the weight of the car is the mass. The velocity is the speed at which you are driving. And momentum is mass into velocity. In an epidemic, number of active cases is the mass. Doubling time is a measure of velocity. And the product is actually the number of daily new cases. That is what results out of these two. When you apply the brake in your car, the vehicle actually slows down, and after some time, the vehicle stops. Between the time you apply the brake and the time the vehicle actually stops, there is a braking distance. In an epidemic, when more and more people in the community are infected, there are fewer vulnerable people. Therefore, the brake is applied. Therefore, the epidemic slows down. And after a few days, the number of new cases will start coming down. It will not come down as soon as the brake is applied. There will be a lag time equivalent to the braking distance when you apply brakes in a car. Now, if you look at the epidemic curve of India, you find that this was the first wave and that was followed by the second wave. And if you look at the second wave, you find there was a steep part of rapid increase. And then there is this point where there is a little inflection. It is slowing down. You can see that very nicely. Now, the brake actually is applied at this particular point in the epidemic curve where there is slowing down. Can we identify this point where we are slowing down? Yes, we can. A simple thing that you need to do is to plot the change in the number of new cases against time. So here there are about 700 extra cases per day. Then here there are about 1,400 extra cases per day over the previous day. This is the rolling average of 7 days. So this ascent actually represents the momentum of the epidemic. And when it reaches this point, the momentum comes down. Still you are getting new cases, but it's not going up as fast as it was doing. The increase comes down to 1,000, comes down to 700, comes down to 0, and starts coming below 0. Now, this is the point at which the numerical peak of the epidemic will occur. And here, after that, the number of cases will progressively decline. So this is the concept of the momentum of the epidemic. The value of identifying the momentum peak of the epidemic is that after the momentum peak, there is slowing down of viral transmission. The numerical peak will occur soon after the momentum peak. The important application is lockdown. Lockdown is most effective when the momentum is rapidly increasing. Lockdown is most effective here. This is where you need the lockdown. Lockdown after this can be counterproductive because it's already coming down and you are continuing a lockdown, which can actually affect lives and livelihoods. Now, this is India's mortality graph, which is very similar to the epidemic graph. This is the first wave, which are relatively small, spread out over time. This was because there was a lockdown. Remember, nationwide lockdown. That's what flattened this first curve. But here, we all rejoiced. We let our guard down. We had the Kumbh Mela, we had elections, gatherings, weddings, religious meetings, and this was the result. A huge upswing in the second wave, which was 4 times the size of the first wave, and condensed over a much shorter period of time, so that our hospital facilities were actually overwhelmed. Now, the mortality momentum also can be studied. That is what is shown as a graph for India's mortality. The mortality rate picks up. It keeps accelerating. And at this point, it starts coming down. And when it comes to below 0 is when the mortality is actually decreasing. And you'll find that there is a second wave of mortality, which is not reflected in the mortality peak. The second wave of mortality that actually occurs here, I can show you here, this one, it is not reflected in the mortality peak of the country. Look at that, it is not reflected here. These finer aspects of the epidemic can only be identified if we study the momentum of the epidemic and the momentum of mortality. Now, this is the number of active cases, daily active cases, and you find that this is a symmetrical curve. And at the peak of the epidemic, we had something like 40 lakh active cases in the whole country. That's a huge number, okay? This is what constitutes the mass in our calculation of momentum. Now, the many peaks of India's epidemic curve second wave and when they occurred are shown in the slide. The momentum peak of new cases occurred on 21st of April. And the final peak, the numerical mortality peak, actually occurred on the 18th of May. So over the 27-day period, all the peaks were over. The numerical peak followed about 2 weeks after the momentum peak. The mortality momentum peaked about 2 weeks after the numerical peak. The active cases peak, which occurred on the 13th of May, is rather close to the numerical mortality peak. You'll notice that. This is 18th of May. So this gives you an indirect idea of when to expect an increase in mortality. How does the identification of these peaks help in managing the epidemic? The momentum peak, I told you, helps us to predict that the numerical peak is going to come soon, within the next couple of weeks. But more importantly, it helps us to identify the timing of lockdown. You must impose a lockdown at the time when the momentum is very rapid. The mortality momentum peak, which I showed, indicates to us that there is an urgent need to increase the capacity, augment the number of beds, have more ICU facilities, have more oxygen available, rush essential drugs. Once the mortality peak is over, then like now, you'll find that every hospital has some surplus of supplies, okay? And when you have surplus supplies, you can start sharing it with neighbors who are needy. Adjacent district has greater need, you can share it with them. Now the active cases peak occurs very close to the numerical mortality peak, as I showed you, the India's epidemic peak, and so can be used as a surrogate marker of the numerical mortality peak and helps us to identify when you need to augment the number of beds, ICU facilities, oxygen, and essential drugs. Now, you must understand that India's epidemic curve is actually a statistical average of its individual states. Similarly, each state's epidemic curve is a statistical average of the epidemic in its districts. I'm saying this because the onset, progression, peak, and decline of the epidemic is not synchronous across the different states, not even across different districts. Therefore, for efficient pandemic management, you need district-wise epidemic dynamics. In fact, when we floated this concept of momentum of the epidemic, Mr. Muru Subramani, who read our article in the New Indian Express, he wrote to us. He is an IT professional. He is from Microsoft. And he said, I can use your concept and idea and make an online website with district-wise data curves. And so he put up this website in record time in public interest. Now, this is the kind of information you can get at the touch of a button using Mr. Muru's website. Now, this is India's COVID momentum peak, then the decline. Now, this is the numerical peak, which followed a couple of weeks later. And this is the active cases peak, which occurred after the numerical peak. So this sequence is maintained across the epidemics in the different states and in the different districts. Now, if you look at Tamil Nadu, you find that the curves are different. The national curves occurred a little earlier, somewhere in April, whereas Tamil Nadu's curves occurred later in May. And this is Tamil Nadu's momentum curve. This is Tamil Nadu's numerical peak, and this is Tamil Nadu's active cases peak, right? So the asynchrony is very clear when you compare the two graphs. Now, this is how we arrive at these graphs. We use the 7-day rolling average. If you actually plot the raw numbers, the curve will be a zigzag line like this. If you use a 7-day rolling average using a computer program, it smoothens out the line. So this is Tamil Nadu's momentum peak, which occurred here. This is momentum mortality, and then it came down. So right now we are on the minus side in terms of mortality. The mortality is rapidly decreasing. Now, this is the daily cumulative mortality in Tamil Nadu. You find that has peaked and that has started coming down. Again, the curve is made smoother by using a rolling 7-day average. Now, this is a very important slide. I'm comparing here the different peaks of India as a country and Tamil Nadu as a representative state. The momentum peak of India was 21.4. Tamil Nadu's momentum peak occurred 3 weeks later on 12.5. India's numerical peak was on 8.5, 2021. 17 days later, you find the numerical peak in Tamil Nadu. The mortality momentum similarly was almost 3 weeks delayed. The numerical mortality peak, India's peak was 18th of May and Tamil Nadu's peak was only 2nd of June. Again, delayed by a period of 2 weeks. The active cases peak shows an 18-day difference between India, which was on 13.5, and Tamil Nadu, which was on 31.5. So this shows a clear asynchrony between the epidemic peaks of Tamil Nadu and that of India. And this is exactly the same situation in every state in India. Each state has its own epidemic with its waves and peaks. Now, this is an example what happens within a state. Now, this is Chennai. Okay. Chennai, this is the momentum peak, which was the first peak to appear. And then it started coming down, it became minus here, and it stays low. Now, this is the numerical peak, which peaked later after a couple of weeks, and then it has started coming down. This is the active cases peak, which is also a reflection of the numerical mortality peak, which has started coming down. So all the peaks in Chennai are over and they are all the way down. And the information up to 2nd of June, after that it has come down even further. Now look at Coimbatore. During the same time frame, what happened in Coimbatore? You find the momentum initially came down a bit and then started going up again. You find that the numbers, daily numbers, went on increasing and probably reached the peak somewhere here. The active cases continue to rise in Coimbatore, right, as of 2nd of June. Only now they have sort of reached a plateau. So the epidemic in Chennai and epidemic in Coimbatore are asynchronous. What is the implication of this? You need to have management of the epidemic district-wise. Now, this online website, which Mr. Guru has put up, is available free to all district level health administrators and officials. And all doctors who want to use it, just log in and have a look. Okay. It helps in evidence-based management of the epidemic. And please remember, none of this work would have been possible without information technology. I have not seen Mr. Muru Subramaniam in person. He has not seen me in person. Our communication has been only through mobile phone. Maybe I've seen his face on a WhatsApp video call. But look at the kind of collaboration that can spontaneously evolve between somebody who generates an idea and somebody who can produce an online application. Now, this is precisely what we need at this time in the management of the epidemic. Now, everybody is talking about a possible third wave. Let me tell you, if every single Indian is careful in the observance of social vaccine, and if we continue to accept the biological vaccine, and if the biological vaccination process is as rapid as it is now, we actually may not see a third wave. But everybody, every single person should cooperate in this effort. Even one person doesn't cooperate, it doesn't work. Thank you very much for a patient listening. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, sir. So, in the chat box, two questions are there, sir, from Dr. Satish.
Yeah.
Sir. So,
Yes, Satish.
At what concentration of the SpO2 did you recommend the oxygen concentrator, sir? Will they not need admission and steroids when they require the oxygen supplementation, sir?
No, steroids were supplied at home. Okay, right. Please remember, a hospital admission is fairly disruptive for many of the patients. Okay, steroids can be supplied as tablets at home, and an oral anticoagulant can be used. We basically use either dexamethasone or methylprednisolone in appropriate doses orally, and it was started at the time point when the oxygen saturation dipped below 95. Okay, so they start on that, and if they need an oxygen concentrator, we can provide it at home. They continue to monitor saturation. If they become sick in spite of this, then they can come to hospital. Now, glucose monitoring is done by the patient at home. In fact, I managed a type 1 diabetic with COVID online. This patient was admitted with diabetic ketoacidosis to another hospital, and she was discharged as soon as the ketoacidosis settled down. She had no instruction as to what to do at home. Okay, so she consulted us online, and we helped her through COVID by a daily online consultation, right? She was a very clever girl. She was able to monitor her sugars. She was able to report. She knew when to contact us. So if the patient is willing to cooperate and follow advice, it is possible to manage the patient at home. With the steroids, the sugars went haywire, and she was taking hourly insulin subcutaneously at home. Okay, that's what she did, and came out of the whole problem over a period of a week. And that was something that I will always remember, that I was able to manage a type 1 diabetic with COVID who had been discharged from hospital, just recovered from ketoacidosis at home. All right.
And one more question from sir. When will you recommend a patient for physical clinical examination, like auscultation in a patient with breathlessness or palpitation in a case of abdominal pain, sir? In those situations, do you tell them go to the clinic?
Yes, of course. See, this is why I've always said that this online consultation process has its limitations. All right. So there are situations which I call red flags, where you need to ask the patient to go to hospital. Okay. Any patient with very severe abdominal pain, like you said, or any patient who is complaining of severe breathlessness and palpitation, right? You may be dealing with a cardiac problem, which cannot be managed online. But the point is, if you sit in an outpatient clinic, these situations probably occur between 2 to 5% of times. Am I correct? The emergencies, right? So the other 95% of times, patients are coming only for some advice on some adjustment of dose of medication if they have a chronic illness, or they might have an acute problem but not life-threatening. The ability to identify life-threatening problems by just taking the history and looking at the patient's face requires experience. That's why I believe that the online consultation should be undertaken with people who have experience in dealing with patients. You must know when to send the patient to the hospital. That's very important. And I was very fortunate that Dr. Manikandan was manning the show in the hospital. I could always ring him up and say, look, I am sending this patient, admit him, and he would do the needful. All right?
Okay, sir. And one more question. Telemedicine camps for the rural people are possible because of technology. continued mm, continued care was possible for TMH without bringing patient to hospital.
Yes, continuity of care is very important. So, I think fortunately, both Mani and I work in a hospital which were designed for a defined rural community, right? With a defined population. We have an outreach program, we have family care volunteers, multi-purpose workers. We have a huge team working at the field level. And if a patient does not know how to monitor blood sugars, our family care volunteers and multi-purpose health workers wearing PPE go home and check. That is the kind of advantage that the patients have when they are part of a very good public health infrastructure. We wrote about this also. Dr. Jacob John and I. India does not actually lack hospitals. India has a lot of hospitals. India has a concentration of hospitals in cities. You all know that. And a paucity of care in rural and semi-urban areas. So the way you bridge the gap is set up a model, which is what we have done in Tirumala Mission Hospital. We have set up a model where we can look after a whole community, primary care at the home level, secondary care at the hospital level, and if they refer tertiary care, we refer. We referred many patients to you, Dr. Anita, to Vellore Medical College Hospital for admission because we cannot ventilate patients in Tirumala Mission Hospital. It's not safe for us to do that. So we refer patients. So we know our limitations and we will handle up to that point in time. All right. So it is quite possible to think of the same system in the government sector. Why not? You have primary health centers, you have your secondary level hospitals and district headquarters hospitals, and you have medical college hospitals. The thing to do is to integrate the system. Now that I think is the key. You have to integrate primary care with secondary care. You have to integrate secondary care with tertiary care. If you do that and put up a good framework of public health, everybody will benefit. And everybody will stay safe. Okay. So the same thing that we did in Tirumala Mission Hospital can be replicated by every district headquarters hospital in the country, right? It is possible, but you must have the approach. Basically, you must train up family care volunteers, you must train up multipurpose workers, and there must be a communication between the three levels. You need to establish that. I think successive governments, both state and central, have not been able to succeed in this integration process, which I think they should focus on. And I think they will focus on it now that they have been hit by the pandemic.
Yeah. Then one more is what anticoagulation and what dose for from the doctor's advice?
We were using Apixaban 2.5 milligram twice a day, oral, or dabigatran, 110 milligram twice a day, oral. Anticoagulants that do not require any monitoring by blood test. We would take a history about any bleeding disorder, of course, and patients who have a propensity for bleeding, yes, they have to be managed at hospital. But 90% of patients don't have that problem, right? Okay.
Have you come across any ocular problems after administering ivermectin, sir?
Have
you come across any ocular problem after administering ivermectin, sir?
Not really. My experience with ivermectin is rather recent, as you all know. At the beginning of the pandemic, we recommended that we use hydroxychloroquine. That's what we were using. Till hydroxychloroquine was considered to be not effective in managing patients with COVID-19. And ivermectin, we have just started using, but we don't use daily regimen. What we are using is 12 milligram as a start dose and a 12 milligram dose after 72 hours, 2 doses. When I reviewed the literature about ivermectin, I found many different schedules have been used. And this schedule of giving it, say, 2 doses after once in 3 days, that is the smallest dose that was used, and that seemed to be as efficacious as the daily dose. So in order to minimize problems, we have been using this dosage. And Mani, have you seen anybody with side effects to ivermectin at this dose?
And no,
I haven't.
not yet, sir.
No.
Not yet. I haven't seen.
But I would admit that my experience is very limited. It is only for the last, say, 3 months, and not with a large number. Do you have any experience, Dr. Sukhpar, with eye problems with ivermectin? You can share it with us.
Sir, not
Sir, you are
audible. Sukumar sir, not audible.
Sir, you are muted. You are muted. You have to unmute.
I had a case who had ivermectin for 5 days, developed a visual field defect.
Field defect. Yeah.
Yes. And slowly
Yeah.
recovering also.
When somebody, was it a homonymous defect or
No, it is not
was it a homonymous
sir.
hemianopia?
No, not like that.
Pardon?
It is, the cortex is normal, the vision is normal, only field is blurred,
There is a blurring of vision. Yeah, yeah.
blurring of
Okay.
vision. No blind spot.
Yeah, you use the daily dose, right?
Somebody
Daily
used to
dose for
say-
5 days. Yeah, daily dose for 5 days. We see, Mani and I discussed this, and we opted for the 12 milligram dose, 2 doses at 72-hour interval, because that seemed to be as effective as any other regimen that we published, right? And has the advantage of a lower dose. See, ivermectin, as you all know, does have neurological side effects. One of the important toxicities of ivermectin is actually a little bit of ataxia in overdose. You can get ataxia, you can have gait disturbance, you can have visual disturbance. So it does have an effect on the central nervous system. So if you want to avoid that, use the lowest dose that is possible, right?
Thank you.
Interestingly, after chloroquine was said to be useless by several people, I don't know whether you've all seen the study in JAPI it's a multi-centric study in JAPI on preventing COVID in healthcare workers using hydroxychloroquine. The same regimen that I originally suggested was used, and people who are regular with the intake of weekly hydroxychloroquine of 400 milligrams seem to be protected to the tune of 72%. Am I right, Mani? The JAPI article.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
If you people have not read the article, I will circulate it to you. In fact, the question on my mind is whether that is still relevant in the context of 2 doses of vaccine not being effective in preventing infection. We all know that. How many people have come after 2 doses of Covishield with COVID infection? I've seen many. In fact, there are so many people who have contacted me over the last 3 months, particularly during the second wave. 2 doses of vaccine, yes, but still infection. But important thing is they don't become very sick. They don't require ICU care, but they get the infection, they get the fever, they get loss of smell, and some of them go on to develop a little desaturation, right? Now, that being the case, and medical profession being highly vulnerable to COVID in view of occupational exposure, if vaccination alone is not sufficient, and if 400 milligram of hydroxychloroquine once a week will bridge the gap, I would not personally hesitate to use it. Okay? But it is a call that every physician should take on his own, on his reading and understanding of the literature.
Thank you, sir. Next question, sir, from Dr. Barney, ma'am. Sir, is the vaccine in the 3rd trimester is safe? In government PHC, vaccine in the early pregnancy only recommend.
In PHC, they are recommending vaccine in
only in a early pregnancy. Early pregnancy.
See, I think we wrote about pregnancy and COVID vaccination just about 2 days ago. It appeared in the Hindu. I don't know whether you saw the article. Otherwise, I can
I circulated,
share it
sir. I
with you
circulated,
people.
sir.
Yeah, share. You can share it with.
I share it in the
everybody.
group.
Okay.
I'll
Yeah.
send it again, sir.
See, the vaccines that have really been tested in pregnancy are the mRNA vaccines, which are used in America, Pfizer, Moderna. We don't have them available. Okay, there are only two vaccines available: Covishield and Covax. Now, with Covishield, there have been reports of thrombotic episodes involving critical veins. Right, very rare. In fact, in 7 million vaccinated people, they found an occurrence of some 11 or 12. That's a very low rate of occurrence, but still it does occur. And pregnancy, particularly later pregnancy, can be a prothrombotic state as also the puerperium. Therefore, there is a hesitation rightly on the part of the government to use the vaccine later in pregnancy. There is a hesitation. Now, you have the other vaccine, which is an inactivated vaccine, which has recently been shown to be as effective. And inactivated vaccines have been used right through pregnancy, other inactivated vaccines. In fact, the WHO has recommended in an interim report that Sinovac, China's inactivated vaccine, which has only 61% protective efficacy, can be used in pregnancy. Then why not Covaxin, which has 78% protective efficacy? That is the basis of our writing in the Hindu to inform the profession and would-be mothers.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Next is how long the anticoagulation to be continued?
I think most people would continue the anticoagulation for 3 to 4 weeks in a patient with serious COVID. But at the end of the 3 to 4 weeks, you may have to take a call on whether you might want to log it a little bit more. I have patients in whom the saturation is still around 93, 94 at the end of a period of anticoagulation. In them, my personal preference is to continue anticoagulation for a further month. And where I have done that, in fact, one of the people who contacted me was my teacher from Coimbatore Medical College. He was admitted, he's nearly 84 now, admitted, discharge has recovered. Still, saturation at home is hovering around 92, 93. Okay. And he said, what do I do? So I said, one option is to continue the anticoagulant. Don't terminate it prematurely. Are you doing that? And the saturation is come up, about 97. So the anticoagulation, the average duration may be 3 to 4 weeks, but in special circumstances, at the discretion of the clinician, it may have to be extended for a variable period of time, provided it shows benefit. I've answered your question.
Yes. And the last question, sir. Is ivermectin for COVID or for prevention of the strongyloids hyperinfection due to the steroids?
Well, strongyloides hyperinfection is something that I have known for a very long time. And it's a very serious disease. And it can kill. People can lose their lives because of that. And the immunocompromise that predisposes to severe COVID, like diabetes. Then the immunocompromise due to COVID because of the lymphopenia. The combination is ideal for emergence of all odd infections. You've all heard about Mucar. Okay. In fact, my daughter-in-law works in Mumbai. She has written a paper on it. Mucormycosis. Huge numbers in Chennai as well. Now, should we not have anticipated this? Knowing that diabetics are going to get out of control during the pandemic because they cannot access their regular physicians, and knowing that when they are admitted to hospital and treated, nosocomial infections are going to be much more common, and knowing that COVID itself suppresses your immune system. This should be something that is anticipated. Fortunately, now in Maharashtra, I understand that they have educated diabetics to identify this problem early. Facial pain. Any diabetic who has had COVID has facial pain. They ask them to come and report to hospital so that they can evaluate them for mucor. That's a simple thing. They widely publicize this, and I understand that patients are coming very early now and they are recovering. It is similar with the spondylitis. Okay. If you have a patient with COVID, and if you find that in spite of your treatment, he is not improving, okay, it's a very simple thing to examine the sputum. You see the larvae, right? And if you find that, yes, you can treat it. Treatment is available, but you need to think of it. Okay. So similarly, Dr. Manikandan was telling me about a patient with COVID who recovered from everything. Only fever is persisting. What do you think of? Everything is all right. Saturation is all right. No problems. Still has a bit of cough, but fever is persistent. Right? Now, somebody, he was a diabetic. He had gone through COVID. He was on steroids. The commonest thing that I would think of is tuberculosis, an occult focus of tuberculosis. And of course, he is on a wide range of drugs. So you have to think of whether it is drug-induced fever. So get rid of all the unnecessary drugs and then see what happens to the fever. At the same time, investigate for tuberculosis. So if you use your practical common sense and wisdom, learn through practical experience in treating patients, then you will think of these things and you will act accordingly. So we as a country fail to anticipate opportunistic infections in the setting of COVID till it really hit us hard. We should have anticipated and acted much earlier.
Thank you, sir.
You can always say hindsight is always easier.
And Satish has shared his view about the Suguma's question about visual defect. So maybe the visual defect was due to the small thrombosis, a complication of COVID, and not the ivermectin. So possibilities.
Exactly my thinking. Exactly my thinking. That's why I asked him whether it's a homonymous defect. If it is a homonymous defect, it is probably due to a vascular process, sudden onset of. But Dr. Sukumar was very clear. He said it is only a kind of blurring of vision.
Only blurring, no blind spot
Only
also.
blurring, no visual field defect. Now, when there is blurring of vision, it can be because the patient has mild diplopia. It can be because he has got a retinal process that is going on. So we cannot say. But a clear-cut hemianopia, acute onset, likely to be due to a vascular accident.
And the last
Even if MRI is normal also.
MRI is normal. MRI is normal. So I think you just have to wait and see whether the visual symptom clears up after he stops. I've had patients who have been on hydroxychloroquine
No, he was
complaining
not
of
on.
visual symptoms.
He
The
was
symptoms, of course, are a very well-known side effect. You stop the drug and then the symptoms clear up.
The last is, I didn't get this. Free words on long COVID, sir. I don't
No,
know.
it is some few words on long COVID.
Few words, sir.
Few words.
Long
FTW.
COVID. Okay, I will
I
tell you. I
didn't
will
got
tell you
something is
only about my. I'm not going to tell you about what I have read about. There are so many things that are written. I will tell you what I have seen. Okay. One of the things I have seen is severe vasomotor instability. In fact, there's a patient from Coimbatore who contacted me, took an online consultation only for this. Young lady recovered from COVID, wide fluctuation of blood pressure, sometimes 80/60, sometimes 160/90, and symptomatic when the blood pressure is low. Bouts of sweating, autonomic dysfunction. This is one thing that I have seen. I don't know whether others have seen this. That is one. The second, much more common, is and inability to perform intellectually as well as they could before COVID. This is a genuine problem. People who were, shall we say, managing very complicated things before they were hit by COVID, find that they are not able to do that with the same speed and clarity after COVID. It's a very common complaint. And it might be because of subtle involvement of the brain during the infection. It might be because of hypoxia causing a little ischemic injury. It may be small blood clots which are not discerned on your current imaging technique, but it's a fairly common complaint. I think probably about 10% of people who have recovered from severe COVID have this as a problem. I have patients who continue to have problems with their toes and fingers. I'm sure you've seen that. Haven't you? Have you seen that? People come with pain in the fingertips, toe tips, particularly on exposure to cold weather, almost like Raynaud's. Okay. And you just ask them to keep their feet and hands warm, and the symptoms disappear. I do not know whether they have circulating cold agglutinins. That is, have you checked that cold agglutinins in patients recovered from COVID, Anita?
No, sir.
Maybe worth checking. Okay, if you want to do a small study.
Okay, sir.
Okay, people who come with the symptoms with toes and fingers, do a cold agglutinin on them. Many viral infections have the ability to induce them. There's also mycoplasma infection. So they may sometimes be responsible for this acral symptoms during long COVID. Articular symptoms, yes, I've seen many. I've seen many with articular after recovery from COVID, multiple joint pains and periarticular pain, not just joint, articular and periarticular pain, responsive to non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. I have one patient who has a persistent neuritic pain. He has got an intercostal neuralgia. I asked him whether he had herpes zoster. He never had herpes zoster, but he has a persistent neuralgic pain along the D8 dermatome, which responded very well to gabapentin. Okay, these are some things I have seen. I know people have written a lot, but I have not seen them, so I'm not going to talk about them.
Okay, so no more. Is there any further questions? No more questions, sir. So, shall I go
If there are no more questions, thank you very much for a very patient listening and a wonderful interaction. I really enjoyed being with you all. And stay safe. And as Mani was saying, encourage everybody around, your colleagues, your patients, mothers, everybody around to go ahead and get vaccinated as soon as they have access to vaccine. I think that's an important thing. And also counsel everyone to adopt COVID appropriate behavior for the social vaccine. Very, very important. Next 6 months are very crucial for India. Next 6 months. If we are able to tide through that time, then I think we will probably be far better off than we are now.
Go for a vote of thanks and short. So I take this golden opportunity to thank each and everyone for your active participation. On behalf of the APA office bearers and chairperson, I extend my gratitude to the distinguished guest speaker, Professor Dr. Seshadri sir, who generously accepted our invitation in spite of his busy COVID schedule and enlightened us with his knowledge and admiring slides and at most patient in answering each and every question. So thank you so much, sir, and thank you one and all. Be safe.
You're welcome. Have a pleasant evening.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Mani,
Thank
the
you.
recording matro.
Yes.
That
Sure, sir,
recording
I'll
you
send
can
it.
just send me.
I'll send it,
That'll
sir.
be-
That'll be
Okay.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.